Good morning Christian, and this, onto the reason. In fact, this week a patient was telling me to give her guidelines as a mother, you see, because it seems to me that my son is taking his high school exam as if it were a life or death competition at 40 years old. She says, I'm experiencing each of his high school exams as if my life depended on it. And indeed, sometimes in families, an exam becomes a source of family stress. Not to mention if it's about the university entrance exam, like the selectividad, where so much is at stake. I believe the issue with this type of exam, such as competitive entrance exams, is that one's future is on the line. For instance, if someone wants to become a doctor, especially when pursuing careers with high entry requirements, such as medical or engineering fields, where the scores matter so much. As far as I understand, the system is quite challenging. It depends on where you are, how the optional subjects are scored, and there's a lot on the line. If you're even a bit hard on yourself and you're aiming for a particular university or a specific field, it becomes a moment of enormous tension. Being 17, 18, 19, or 20 years old, the emotional tools at their disposal are limited. It's a crucial time when the emotional resources available are what they are. In this context, I know many people who froze during their university entrance exams and didn't achieve the required scores. This is the big fear. I also know people who completely froze during competitive entrance exams, even though they knew the material perfectly. So, as someone from a family of exam takers, I remember my husband who took such exams. I would spend the day before helping him with emotional techniques and relaxation because there's definitely anxiety. If there's something that listeners at home could apply, well, I believe the first thing to know is that the information, for parents who are listening, if there's a child listening to the radio, it's all stored in the hippocampus, which is like a big information archive. Let's simplify, but often, the mind simplifies things to help us live more relaxed lives. So, the brain works like Google Earth. You know, Christina, that application where you see the world map, and then you zoom in on Madrid, and you keep going until you see your house in Madrid. Well, it's as if all our knowledge is stored in that Earth globe. The problem is that we start thinking about what we have in Russia, what we have in Chile, what we have in Spain, and we forget and don't visualize the notes, the answers. But if you're focused, you say, wait a moment, I'm going to Moscow. You start going down, 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 and it's like the capacity opens up to access the hippocampus and find the answer. The thing is, when you're right before the exam, and this is very typical of the day before, like tomorrow or early Monday or Tuesday, and suddenly you're on the subway or in the car heading to the exam, and you're trying to remember everything and mentally review everything you know, and then a vital anguish sets in. What happens is that the moment you get into anxiety, fear, stress, the stress hormone cortisol rises, and automatically cortisol blocks the hippocampus. The ability you have to access the hippocampus becomes much more difficult, it's like it's shut down. The hippocampus is very sensitive to cortisol receptors, which is the stress hormone. The prefrontal cortex, which is the part in the front that helps us plan, solve problems, find different solutions, etc., starts to have reduced blood flow. Therefore, if there's stress, we function worse. This is from the book, but I didn't emphasize that. Endure that. The first thing is that the attitude prior to an exam determines how I respond to it. An interesting study conducted a few years ago, Christina, selected students with similar grades and the same IQ. They were randomly placed into two groups. The first group was told, you have this very difficult exam to solve, and we don't think you can solve it, but try. The second group was told, we know you're the smartest, we've placed you here because you're smarter than the students in the other class, and we know you'll ace the exam. What happened was that no one from the first group passed the exam, but everyone from the second group did. There were children in the second group. What this means is that attitude has a huge influence on an exam. Of course, you need to know a bit to be able to answer, but if you have the knowledge, more or less, some have more, some have less, but if you have it, your inner voice will help you. If you sit down for the exam and suddenly think, well, this is awful, they didn't ask us this, I didn't study this, and I haven't revised that, your brain automatically switches to that mode. The amygdala is activated, stress sets in, the hippocampus doesn't function properly, and the prefrontal cortex is impaired, and you can't find the solution. But if at some point during the year or the academic course, you think, I've seen this topic somewhere, or I covered this in the past, so you search for it, and surely you have tools to solve it, better or worse, but you have the tools. It's like your brain opens up that possibility for it to happen. I've guided many people through exams, competitive entrance exams over the years, and this is something that works very well. In moments of blockage, a minute of pause, a minute and a half of deep breathing, just inhaling intensely, holding the air in your lungs, and exhaling slowly, solely focused on breathing. That takes us out of the state of alert, that peak of cortisol. And it helps to reopen the possibility for that hippocampus to bring back the knowledge to the surface. And if you feel very blocked, those 1, 2, 3 minutes of deep breathing will help you get out of the anxiety. Now, for the upcoming Saturday and Sunday, I was talking yesterday with someone who is preparing for notary exams, knowing they'll start in September. One of the things they told me is that they won't rest on any weekend, and they plan to sleep a little less because they're getting closer. Look, the human brain isn't designed to be in alert mode for such a long time. If you're preparing for exams, sleep is crucial. Memories consolidate during sleep. Everyone listening knows that a night without sleep has saved many exams. We've all experienced that moment before an exam when suddenly you might study all night and take the exam. I understand the attempt, but I wouldn't recommend it at all when so much is at stake. The chances of being blocked the next day are much higher. In an ordinary exam during the course in March, for example, I wouldn't recommend it. But I understand you might feel overwhelmed and say, I'll try. Sleep well these 23 nights, take a calming tea, take a walk before resting to clear your mind, etc. The second point is to avoid distractions. No calling your friends, asking how they're doing, how they've been studying, or anything. All those discussions are completely off limits because they're one of the biggest sources of anxiety. Each has their own struggles. Avoid excessive screen time, reduce your time on social media. People on Twitter might be saying that an exam has leaked, that someone claimed a topic will be on the test. These conspiracy theories are terrible because suddenly you're focusing on something you've seen on Twitter. I remember a patient from last year who someone on Twitter gave a tip that a certain topic would appear. She only studied that topic the day before, and logically, it didn't show up on the exam. She was indignant. I said, well, knowing things, theories can come up, but in general, follow your own pace and avoid talking to people about it. And then for the review techniques during these days of preparation, everyone has their own way of studying, with diagrams, mnemonic devices, walking while studying, using their own method. Stick to what works for you. Don't try new things right before the exam. Take short breaks. And then, I don't know if there's time, but for those who can and are nearby, if they know where the exam location is, they should go and see it from the outside. Because when the brain realizes it's a familiar zone, the state of alertness increases much less. So, even if it's just looking at it from the outside, like if it's a subway station and I can see it, I remember doing this the day before the university entrance exam. I went to see where it was, how to get in, how to exit. The next day, when I went there, my brain wasn't as nervous because I had already experienced that. So, the element of novelty generates much less stress. And here's a piece of advice for parents, because they also get nervous, and secondly, they have to deal with their children's irritability. I believe that showing support and understanding their distress and stress is crucial, but also with a supportive gesture, using these tips. One thing I didn't mention but is important is nutrition. It seems to be a key factor because the fridge becomes a source of distress at that point. Having only cookies and chips can lead to hunger and frustration. Good nutrition always helps. And as parents, support without generating more stress is important. I know parents who experience this with such intensity that they create a mental blockage in their children. They put so much importance on the matter that the children start doing it not only for themselves but also for their parents. Creating a positive message and attitude is important. Since we know that an attitude of support is beneficial, take advantage of it without pressuring them.